A grieving black CEO finds a homeless child on Christmas Eve. Unaware she holds the key to healing his shattered heart and is the forgotten daughter of his late wife. "Sir, are you sure you want to go this way? The storm is getting worse." The snow fell in thick, silent flakes over the city, blanketing the cold, unforgiving streets in a deceptively soft layer of white, a pristine shroud over the grime and desperation below. Elias Vance stared out from the heated leather interior of his sleek black sedan, watching the sterile perfection of the snow and feeling a familiar, hollow ache settle deep within his chest, a ghost of a feeling that had become his only constant companion. The city felt dead. Christmas Eve was a symphony of forced joy he could no longer conduct, a kaleidoscope of warm, golden lights that only served to illuminate the cavernous emptiness within him. The relentless hammering of the rain had been replaced by this soft hush, a silence that was somehow louder, more accusing. 2 years. 2 years since Lily was gone, and the world had the audacity to keep spinning, to keep draping itself in tinsel and cheer as if the most important piece of its machinery hadn't fractured and fallen away. He clenched his jaw, the crisp fabric of his impeccably tailored suit feeling like a cage around his weary soul. The polished marble floors of his stately mansion, the gleaming chrome of his office, the crisp rustle of billion-dollar contracts. It all amounted to nothing more than a collection of exquisitely crafted echoes in a soundproof room. His heart was a vault, and Lily had taken the only key. He was a king ruling over an empire of ghosts. His driver, Robert, a man with a steady gaze and a quiet understanding born of a decade of service, cleared his throat gently, his eyes meeting Elias's in the rearview mirror. "Sir, the main roads are clearer. This route through the industrial sector is—" Robert faltered, searching for the right word. Bleak Elias offered a curt nod, his gaze fixed on the flickering streetlights that cast long, dancing shadows down deserted alleyways. "Stay on this course, Robert," he commanded, his voice a low rumble that held no warmth, no festive spirit. He didn't know why he chose this path, this tour through the city's forgotten corners. Perhaps it was a form of self-flagellation, a need to surround himself with an external world that matched the desolate landscape of his own heart. He needed the biting cold to feel real, the heavy fog to validate the haze in his mind. He was chasing a feeling, any feeling, other than the profound numbness that had taken root where love used to live. The car moved at a crawl, its tires making soft crunching sounds on the fresh snow, the only noise in the sacred stillness of the night. That was when he saw it. A flicker of movement in the deep shadows between a shuttered warehouse and a row of overflowing dumpsters. It was a small shape, a bundle of threadbare rags almost entirely consumed by the encroaching darkness. Elias leaned forward, his brow furrowing. He saw the unmistakable shape of a small child, huddled behind a pile of black trash bags as if they might offer some meager protection from the biting cold. Lightning flashed across the sky in his memory. A different storm, the night his world had splintered. He remembered the sterile silence of the hospital, the scent of antiseptic, the unbearable weight of a doctor's unspoken words. Now a child, alone, on Christmas Eve. Something inside him, a brittle, frozen thing he had long thought dead, cracked. A sharp gasp escaped his lips, quiet but seismic. "Stop the car," he said, his voice suddenly raw, unfamiliar to his own ears. Robert pulled over without a word, the vehicle humming softly by the curb. Elias didn't know it yet, but this moment, this simple command, would change everything. He pushed open the heavy door, the frigid air a physical blow, a shock to his system that momentarily cleared the fog. He was moving before he had fully formed a thought, his polished leather shoes sinking into the pristine snow, each step a deliberate defiance of the apathy that had held him captive for so long. As he drew closer, the scene sharpened into a portrait of desperate innocence. The child, a little girl no older than 5 or 6, was not sleeping. She was hunched over, her small, trembling hands cupped around a tiny, shivering kitten, her own body serving as a fragile shield against the wind. She wore a worn, threadbare coat that was pitifully inadequate, her pale face smudged with dirt, her dark curls matted and damp with melting snow. but it was her eyes that made his heart thud wildly against his ribs. They were wide and dark, and in their depths he saw not fear or self-pity, but a quiet, dignified resolve. She was a virtuous sufferer, an embodiment of pure-hearted resilience in a world that had clearly shown her none. She looked up at him, her gaze unflinching, a tiny guardian protecting an even smaller soul. He froze. Elias approached slowly, his hands raised in a gesture of peace, a language he hoped this small, fierce creature would understand. He shed his own heavy wool overcoat, $1,000 piece of fabric, and knelt in the snow, the cold seeping through the fine material of his trousers. The coat was a blanket of impossible warmth in this frozen landscape. "Hello," he said, his voice softer than he'd heard it in years. The little girl watched him, her expression steady, her small body still curved protectively around the kitten. She did not speak. He held out the coat. "You're cold. Please, take this." He expected her to snatch it, to show the desperation her situation demanded. Instead, she hesitated, her gaze flicking from his face to the thick, warm fabric and back again. It was a moment of internal hesitation, a flicker of mistrust quickly overcome by something deeper, something inherently good. She gave a small, solemn nod. He gently draped the coat around her, the sheer size of it swallowing her whole. The warmth of the blanket was a symbol of safety, a promise in a world of broken trusts. As he did, a small object fell from the pocket of her own tattered coat, landing silently in the snow. It was a tiny wooden bird, whittled by hand, its paint faded and chipped, one wing slightly splintered. It was clearly a precious thing, a treasure. He reached to pick it up for her, but she was faster. She scooped it up and held it tightly in her small, chapped hand. He expected her to hoard it, to hide it away. He was wrong. Her actions defied all logic of a transactional world. She looked at his face, her gaze profound and searching, as if she could see past the impeccable suit and the commanding presence to the shattered man beneath. She saw the hollow eyes, the haunted set of his jaw. Then, she did something that splintered the last of his icy composure. She held out the little wooden bird to him, a selfless act performed at her own expense, a gift from someone who had nothing, given without any expectation of reward. This was the catalyst. "For you," she whispered, her voice a fragile wisp of sound. "You look sadder than the sky." His heart stopped. The world tilted on its axis. A sob caught in his throat, thick and unbearable. This child, this forsaken angel sleeping on trash, had seen the one thing his board members, his investors, his so-called friends, had never bothered to look for. The raw, gaping wound in his soul. It was a moment of stunned silence, a profound, life-altering impact that echoed in the deepest chambers of his being. He, Elias Vance, a titan of industry, was being offered comfort by a homeless child. The absurdity, the purity, the undeniable grace of the gesture was a cathartic blow. He slowly reached out and took the small bird, its worn wood warm from her hand. It felt heavier than all his assets combined, a sacred totem of an innocence he thought long extinct. "Thank you," he managed to say, his voice cracked. "What is your name?" She looked down, a flicker of shyness finally showing. "Sarah," she said quietly. He nodded, clearing his throat to regain some semblance of control. "Sarah, my name is Elias." He looked at the shivering kitten she still held. "We can't stay out here. Both of you." The brief, almost silent exchange was over, but it left an indelible mark, an open loop that he knew, with every fiber of his being, he had to close. He gently scooped her up, coat, kitten and all. She was impossibly light, a bundle of fragile bones and unwavering spirit. She didn't fight him. Instead, she leaned her head against his shoulder with a sigh of weary trust. As he carried her back to the gleaming, warm car, he knew his life had been irrevocably cleaved into two parts: the long, gray winter before he met her, and whatever came next. She was gone from the alley, but she had taken up permanent residence in his soul. Total silence reigned in the car as Robert drove, his eyes occasionally flicking to the rearview mirror, his expression one of quiet awe. Sarah fell asleep almost instantly, her breathing soft and even against the crisp fabric of his shirt. Elias held her, the small wooden bird clenched in his fist, and for the first time in 2 years, he didn't feel the biting cold of his grief. He felt the warmth of a new, terrifying, and sacred purpose. He took her to the city's best private hospital, a place where his name commanded immediate and unquestioning action. The sterile silence of the corridors was a stark contrast to the chaos of the alley, but it felt equally cold. Doctors and nurses moved with quiet efficiency, their faces a mixture of professionalism and poorly concealed curiosity. Sarah was whisked away to be examined, warmed, and fed, the kitten sent to a 24-hour veterinary clinic with a blank check from Elias for its care. He was left alone in a private waiting room, the ornate furniture and soft lighting feeling utterly absurd. He paced the plush carpet, the wooden bird still in his hand, its rough texture a grounding force. A kind-faced doctor, a woman named Eris Thorne, finally entered. Her eyes were gentle, but her expression was grave. "Mr. Vance?" she began, her voice soft. Physically, the little girl, Sarah, is remarkably resilient. Malnourished, dehydrated, but no signs of serious illness or injury. We're warming her up and she's already eaten a full bowl of soup. Elias felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled his knees. "Thank you, doctor." "Thank you," she hesitated. "The thing is, Mr. Vance, we had to report her to Child Protective Services. It's the law. A child found in her condition with no guardian." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The system, the cold, impersonal machinery of bureaucracy, was about to swallow this beacon of pure light. "A caseworker is on her way. She'll likely be placed in a state-run emergency shelter until they can determine her situation," a state-run shelter. He imagined Sarah, so quiet and dignified, being lost in a sea of other broken children, her gentle spirit crushed by the sheer weight of institutional neglect. The thought was a physical pain, a knife twisting in his newly reawakened heart. His protective instincts, dormant since he'd lost Lily, surged with the force of a tidal wave. "No," he said, his voice dropping to a commanding low. "That will not happen." Dr. Thorne looked at him with a mixture of pity and professional deference. "Mr. Vance, I understand your concern, but my hands are tied. The process is—" He cut her off, his tone sharp. "I will handle the process. Find out where they are taking her. I want the name of the facility, the director, everything." He was already pulling out his phone, his mind racing, gears of power and influence beginning to turn after years of rusting in place. The consequence of his intervention was this separation, this looming threat of losing her back to the darkness from which he'd pulled her. He was allowed to see her one last time before the caseworker arrived. He found her in a warm hospital bed, tucked under a crisp white blanket, looking impossibly small. She was awake, her dark eyes watching him. She held a cup of warm tea in both hands, a gift from a nurse. He sat on the edge of the bed. "Sarah," he began, his voice thick with an unspoken promise. "Some people are going to come and take you to a new place for a little while. It will be safe, and it will be warm." Her gaze was unwavering. She seemed to understand things far beyond her years. "Will you be there?" she asked, her voice a small, trembling thread. The question shattered him. I can't be there right away," he admitted, the words tasting like ash. "But I will find you. I promise you, I will not lose you." He reached out and gently touched her hand. For a fleeting moment, she leaned into his touch, a silent acknowledgement of their momentary connection. Then the door opened with a soft click. A stern-faced woman in a drab suit stood there, her expression impatient. The moment was over. Sarah was taken from him. He was a man accustomed to immediate results. When he wanted a company, he acquired it. When he wanted a deal, he closed it. But the intricate, molasses-slow bureaucracy of the family court system was an opponent unlike any he had ever faced. He couldn't simply buy a child. The realization was both frustrating and, in a strange way, humbling. Sarah had been placed at the St. Jude's Home for Children, a grim, underfunded facility on the city's outskirts run by a director whose name he quickly came to despise, Mrs. Agnes Grimshaw. His private investigators delivered a file on her that made his blood run cold. She was a petty tyrant, a personification of cruelty and impatience who viewed the children in her care as inventory, not souls. Direct intervention was impossible. It would be seen as undue influence. So Elias began a different kind of campaign. He moved like a ghost, his immense wealth the tool for a series of secret interventions. An anonymous benefactor made a massive donation to St. Jude's, specifically earmarked for infrastructure. Suddenly, the ancient, clanking boiler was replaced with a new, silent system that filled the drafty halls with consistent warmth. Truckloads of new blankets, mattresses, and clothes arrived, all from a shell charity he'd established overnight. The threadbare sheets were replaced with soft flannel, the lumpy cots with comfortable beds. He arranged for a new food supplier, one that provided fresh fruit and quality meals instead of the usual processed starches. The children at St. Jude's suddenly found their world a little softer, a little warmer, a little fuller, with no idea that their hidden savior was a grieving CEO who checked reports on their well-being every single morning from his cavernous office. His focus, however, was always on Sarah. He had a discreet watch set up, ensuring her safety. He learned that she was quiet, that she kept to herself, that she spent most of her time drawing in a small notepad one of the kinder aides had given her. She never cried. She never complained. She simply endured with that same quiet dignity he had first seen in the alley. It wasn't enough. This quiet observation, this distant protection, felt like a hollow victory. He needed to see her, to keep the promise that echoed in his heart. He couldn't be a father yet, but he could be a presence. After weeks of legal maneuvering, his lawyers secured him a position as an official volunteer and sponsor for the home. The day he walked back through the doors of St. Jude's, his heart was pounding with an anxiety he hadn't felt since he'd proposed to Lily. Mrs. Grimshaw greeted him with a sycophantic smile, her eyes gleaming at the man she knew only as the source of the home's recent good fortune. "Mr. Vance, what an honor. The children will be so thrilled," he barely heard her. His eyes scanned the large, sterile common room until he found her. She was sitting in a corner, away from the loud chaos of the other children, that notepad in her lap. She was no longer pale and smudged with dirt, but her fragility remained. She was a wildflower in a concrete garden. Their eyes met across the room, a flicker of recognition, of disbelief, then something else. Hope. He walked over, his footsteps echoing on the polished linoleum. He knelt down beside her chair. "Hello, Sarah," he said softly. She simply looked at him, her gaze steady, 1,000 unspoken questions in her eyes. He had kept his promise. He was there. That first visit set the pattern for the weeks that followed. Twice a week, Elias would shed his corporate armor, trading his crisp suits for soft sweaters, and enter the world of St. Jude's. He never singled Sarah out in a way that would draw Mrs. Grimshaw's ire, but their time together became a sacred ritual. They would sit in the small, underused library, a quiet, safe space away from the noise. He would read to her from worn copies of fairy tales, his deep voice a soothing presence. In these moments, they began to forge a bond over shared, unspoken grief. He saw the loneliness in her that mirrored his own. He was a man in a crowded world who felt utterly alone. She was a child surrounded by others but existing on her own small island. One gray afternoon, as a cold rain hammered against the library window, he found himself opening a door he had kept locked for 2 years. He was telling her a story about a brave knight, and his voice faltered. She looked up at him with her unervingly perceptive eyes. "Why are you sad today?" she asked. He took a deep breath. "I was just thinking about someone I miss very much," he said, the confession feeling raw and monumental. "My wife. Her name was Lily." He didn't tell her the whole tragic story, just the simple, aching truth. She was like sunshine. She made everything warm. Sarah listened with that unwavering, steady gaze, her eyes making him feel truly seen. She didn't offer empty platitudes. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a crayon and a scrap of paper from her notepad. She began to draw. A few minutes later, she pushed the paper towards him. It was a simple, childish drawing of a bright yellow sun with a smiling face, its rays reaching out across the page. It was the most profound expression of empathy he had ever received. He picked it up, his fingers trembling slightly. "Thank you, Sarah. This is perfect." In return, she began to share parts of herself, not in words, but through her art. She drew pictures of the alley, but with the kitten safe and warm in a little house. She drew pictures of the stars, which she said were holes in the floor of heaven. She never drew a mother or a father. It was a past she kept locked away, a door she was not yet ready to open. One day he brought a small, beautifully wrapped gift for her. It was a new sketchbook with a set of high-quality colored pencils. Her eyes widened, but she hesitated to take it. "It's too much," she whispered. "No, it's not," he said gently. "I wanted you to have it." As she finally took it, her small hand brushed against his. The simple, non-romantic physical contact was like a spark, a moment of connection that affirmed the undeniable bond growing between them. He was no longer just a benefactor. He was becoming her anchor, and she, in turn, was becoming his reason. He filed the official adoption papers the next day. The process would culminate at the annual St. Jude's Charity Gala, where his public support and final interview with the board would, his lawyers assured him, seal the decision. He didn't know that Mrs. Grimshaw had other plans. The St. Jude's Charity Gala was a nauseating spectacle of wealth and performative compassion. The city's elite mingled in the main hall, which had been transformed with ornate decorations, sipping champagne and congratulating themselves on their generosity. Elias moved through the crowd, a commanding figure in an impeccable tuxedo, his expression a polite mask that concealed the frantic thudding of his heart. He was a guest of honor, slated to give a speech about the importance of philanthropy. But his only focus was on the small group of children, dressed in their Sunday best, who were trotted out to be seen by their benefactors. He found Sarah standing near a large potted fern, looking overwhelmed by the noise and the glittering lights. She was wearing a simple blue dress that one of the kinder aides had helped her pick out. She looked like a fragile doll, beautiful and breakable. He gave her a small, reassuring smile from across the room, a silent promise that this would all be over soon. The evening's program began, and Mrs. Grimshaw took the stage, her voice dripping with false humility as she thanked the donors. Then her eyes, cold and hard as polished stones, landed on Sarah. "And we are so blessed to have children like little Sarah here," she said, her voice amplified by the microphone. "Found on the streets, a true product of her environment. Yet she has captured the heart of our most generous benefactor, Mr. Vance." A murmur went through the crowd. Mrs. Grimshaw's smile tightened. She saw Elias's affection for Sarah not as a miracle, but as a threat to her own control over the home's funding. She had decided to make a public point. The public humiliation began. "Of course, when you take in children from such circumstances," she continued, her tone laced with disdain, "one must be very careful. They can be quite manipulative." She walked over to Sarah and grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the center of the stage. Sarah winced, her body trembling. "Just yesterday," Grimshaw announced to the silent room, "this one was found with a stolen roll of bread in her mattress. After all we've given her. Ungrateful. Some children, you see, can never truly escape what they are." She looked directly at Elias. Street trash, the words, sharp and cruel, echoed in the cavernous hall. Sarah stood frozen, her face pale, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She remained dignified, her chin held high, but she was visibly overwhelmed, a small ship being battered by a hurricane of cruelty. The room was thick with uncomfortable silence. The foil had made her move, creating the perfect stage for a hero. And then he came. Elias Vance moved from the back of the room, not with anger, but with a calm, powerful grace that parted the sea of gawking guests. His entrance was commanding. He stepped onto the stage, his presence sucking all the air out of the room. He gently removed Sarah's arm from Mrs. Grimshaw's grasp and pulled the trembling child behind him, creating a human shield. He turned to face the director, his eyes like chips of obsidian. Total silence. "You are mistaken, Mrs. Grimshaw," Elias began, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the ornate hall. It was the voice he used to dismantle corporations, now repurposed to defend a child's soul. He did not need a microphone. "Sarah is not a thief. I know this because the extra bread you speak of was something I gave to her myself, because she told me she was saving it for a younger boy in her dormitory who she noticed was still hungry after dinner." He let that sink in, the revelation of Sarah's selfless character hanging in the air. The powerful monologue had begun. He then turned his commanding gaze to the audience of wealthy patrons. "For weeks, I have watched this place. I have seen the quiet kindness of the night staff and the weary dedication of the teachers. But I have also seen the sterile impatience of an administration that views children as balance sheets. I have seen the cruelty of a woman who mistakes desperation for manipulation and innocence for weakness." He looked back at Mrs. Grimshaw, whose face had gone from smug to ashen. "You speak of what Sarah is. Let me tell you what she is. She is resilient. She is pure-hearted. On the coldest night of the year, with nothing to her name, she offered me, a stranger, her only possession because she thought I looked sad. She is the embodiment of a grace and dignity that people in this room could spend a lifetime and a fortune trying to acquire." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "You are right about one thing. She has captured my heart. And that is why, as of the board's final approval this evening, I am adopting her. She will be my daughter." A collective gasp went through the crowd. It was a grand revelation, a public declaration that completely reversed the power dynamic. He looked at the stunned faces of the board members sitting at the front table. "And my first act as the new primary benefactor of this institution will be to call for a full and immediate review of its leadership." The threat was clear, the implication undeniable. Mrs. Grimshaw was finished. He had not only defended Sarah, he had publicly offered her protection, a name, a family, a future. He had left the antagonist utterly speechless and stripped of her power. He then knelt down, turning his back on the disgraced director and the shocked audience, creating an intimate world that contained only him and the little girl he now considered his own. "It's over, Sarah," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You're safe. You're coming home," for the first time since he'd met her. He saw tears spill from her eyes and trace clean paths through the faint smudges on her cheeks. They were not tears of sadness. They were tears of cathartic release. She launched herself into his arms, her small body shaking with sobs, and he held her tightly, the feel of her fragile arms around his neck healing the final fractured pieces of his heart. She was home. The adoption was fast-tracked with breathtaking speed. Within days, the last of the paperwork was signed. Mrs. Grimshaw was suspended pending an investigation, and Sarah was walking out of St. Jude's for the last time, her small hand held firmly in Elias's. Her worldly possessions fit into a single cardboard box. Back at his stately mansion, the cavernous rooms that once echoed with silence and grief now felt different, filled with potential. The staff, who had only ever known a haunted, distant employer, watched in stunned silence as he knelt to show a small child the grand staircase, his voice gentle and full of a warmth they had never heard. He had given her a room that was once a guest suite, a beautiful space with large windows overlooking the snow-covered gardens. It was filled with new toys, a soft bed piled high with pillows, and a small desk with a brand-new set of art supplies. But Sarah was most interested in the small cardboard box from the orphanage. It was her history, her link to a life she was leaving behind. That evening, after a quiet dinner in the grand dining room where Elias had, for the first time in 2 years, truly tasted his food, he helped her unpack. There wasn't much. A few worn articles of clothing, the sketchbook he had given her, and a handful of her drawings. As he lifted the last folded sweater, he felt something hard and flat sewn into the hem of her old, threadbare coat, the one she'd been wearing in the alley. His brow furrowed, felt like a small card. "What's this, sweetheart?" he asked gently. She just shook her head, her eyes wide. She had never known it was there. With a small penknife from his desk, he carefully snipped the threads of the lining. Inside was a small, plastic-wrapped parcel. His heart began to pound with a strange premonition. He carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a single, faded photograph, cracked at the corners, and a delicate silver locket on a tarnished chain. The truth was here. He picked up the photograph, his hand trembling. His breath hitched. It was a picture of his late wife, Lily. She was younger, her face radiant with a joy he remembered so vividly it was a physical pain, and she was holding a newborn baby wrapped in a pale pink blanket. A sob escaped his lips. The baby in the photograph had the same wide, dark, soulful eyes as the little girl standing beside him. He opened the locket. On one side was a microscopic picture of Lily. On the other, a tiny, folded piece of paper. With shaking fingers, he unfolded the note. The handwriting was unmistakably Lily's. "My dearest Serafina," it read, "I love you more than all the stars in the sky. I have to let you go to keep you safe, but I will find you. I will never, ever stop looking for you. All my love, your mother, Lily." The truth left him stunned. It crashed over him in a seismic wave, rearranging his past, his present, and his future. Sarah was not just some random child fate had thrown in his path. She was Lily's daughter, a child from a time before he knew her, a secret she had carried, a grief she had borne alone. He remembered her quiet sadness, her unexplained trips, her desperate, secret search for the child she had been forced to give up as a terrified teenager. He wasn't just saving a child. He was fulfilling his wife's most desperate, unspoken wish. It was not a coincidence. It was a miracle. He sank to his knees, the photograph and locket in his hand, and looked at the little girl who was his daughter, his link to his lost love, his salvation. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice thick with tears, "I have something to tell you. It's about your mother." 1 year later, the snow fell in thick, silent flakes over the city, blanketing the streets in a soft layer of white. But inside the Vance mansion, every room was filled with a golden glow, a warmth that had nothing to do with the roaring fireplaces and everything to do with the sound that now filled its halls. Laughter. Christmas Eve was no longer a hollow echo of pain for Elias. It was a celebration of life, of second chances, of a love that had been reborn from the ashes of grief. A magnificent Christmas tree stood in the great hall, covered not in ornate, professionally placed ornaments, but in a chaotic, joyful mix of sparkling lights, handmade paper chains, and dozens of small, hand-drawn pictures of smiling suns, courtesy of its chief decorator. Sarah, now 7, vibrant and full of life, directed the placement of the final angel on top of the tree, perched securely on Elias's shoulders. Her laughter was the only music he ever wanted to hear again. Later that evening, they sat together on a soft rug before the fire, a cup of hot cocoa in Sarah's hands, a small wooden bird sitting proudly on the mantelpiece above them. The worn toy was now the family's most sacred heirloom. Elias opened a velvet box. Inside was the silver locket, now polished and gleaming, on a new chain. "Your mother wanted you to have this," he said softly, his voice full of a tender reverence. He helped her fasten it around her neck. She looked down at it, her fingers tracing the delicate engraving. "She's one of the stars now, right?" Sarah asked, her voice quiet, not with sadness, but with a peaceful certainty. "The brightest one," Elias confirmed, his arm tightening around her. They had talked about Lily often over the past year. He shared stories of her laughter, her kindness, her love for sunshine, giving Sarah a legacy of love instead of a history of abandonment. In this house, Lily was not a ghost. She was a guardian angel. They were a family, forged in a snow-covered alley, bound by a love that transcended life and death. The cavernous mansion was no longer an empire of ghosts. It was a home. This story is a testament to the idea that the deepest connections are often born from our deepest wounds. It's a fable of kindness and redemption, showing that even in the coldest, most desperate of nights, a single, selfless act can ignite a warmth that thaws the most frozen of hearts. Elias Vance was a man who had everything and nothing, a king in a sterile castle, until a little girl with nothing but a kind heart and a wooden bird showed him what true wealth was. And Sarah, a child the world had thrown away, found not just a savior, but a father, and the truth of a mother's undying love. Their journey reminds us that family is not just about blood, but about the bonds we choose to forge, and that the greatest miracles often arrive in the most unexpected of packages, waiting to be discovered in the shadows. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of the power of hope and the unexpected ways love can heal, please let us know. We believe that stories like this are more than just entertainment. They are a source of inspiration, a reminder of the light that exists even in the darkest of times. Your response helps us understand what resonates with you, and it encourages us to continue creating narratives that aim to uplift the human spirit. For more soul-stirring tales of love, loss, and redemption, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to Soulful Love Tales. We are dedicated to bringing you more inspiring stories that explore the profound and transformative power of human connection. Join our community and never miss a heartwarming story that will move you, inspire you, and reaffirm your faith in the goodness of people. We'll see you in the next one.